It's a little bit of a different view from up here. First time up here, so I'm shaking because I'm cold, not because I'm nervous. Bit of an introduction of who I am if you haven't had the chance to do a coffee with Sylvia yet. As Reverend Matthew Baugh mentioned earlier, I am the Minister of Faith Formation here at MBCC. I recently moved from Chicago to California. Before this, I have lived my entire life in the Midwest. The last 10 years, I lived in Chicago, where I attended McCormick Theological Seminary and started out my ministry. However, I did not grow up in Chicago. I grew up in a very small rural community called Walnut Grove. It's in Missouri. So no, it's not where Laura Ingalls Wilder was. That's in Minnesota, I believe, or Wisconsin? Minnesota, I think. Walnut Grove, Missouri is actually in the Ozarks, the Ozark Mountains. So if you've seen the Netflix show Ozarks, or if you've watched Winter's Bone, please come to one of the coffees with Sylvia and I'll tell you everything they got right and everything they got wrong. It was in this small town of about 650 people that I first heard the text that we read today. In this text, we see Jesus calling his disciples, James, John, Simon, Peter, to become fishers of people. Now, I chose this reading of it rather than the NRSV, which is what you have in your pews, because I prefer fishers of people over fishers of men. So that's why it was a little bit different for you today. So this is the calling of the disciples. It's a really cool moment. I think it's really the start of Jesus' ministry. It is him going out to the people. Jesus is teaching to a crowd of people that are so interested in what he's saying that more and more people show up and they crowd in against him. The people are crowding in so much that he has to ask Simon to use his boat to go a little bit out into the Sea of Galilee so he can preach to the whole crowd. If having that many people actually pay attention to your sermon isn't enough of a miracle, Jesus then performs a miracle and provides fish for the fishermen after they had had no luck that day. So that's two unexpected things that have happened in the story. But I think my favorite unexpected thing is the third. Jesus turns to these seemingly ordinary men and tells them to follow him, leave everything they know, to do something completely new, something completely different, out of the box or out of the boat, to try something outside of their own world. And these men did it. In that moment, they followed Jesus in complete faith and became fishers of people. They became Jesus' disciples. So I remember this text from the many, many times it was told to me in Sunday school with the old felt boards, if anybody remembers those. I remember the sermons where my preacher would actually get up in his fisher hat to tell these stories. And I remember the We Sing song that we all learned at VBS. I will make you fishers of men, fishers of men, fishers of men. I will make you fishers of men if you follow me. Now you can see why I remember it. It's literally that over and over again. And you can also see why I don't do music ministry. I could literally recite this story forwards and backwards. The story really resonated with my Ozarkian soul because I understood fishing. That was something that was literally taught in our schools when we got our hunting and fishing license together as a 6th grade class. It's true. So I knew exactly what this text was trying to say. And this is very true, and I know Jackson said it was pretty ridiculous early, but in my mind as a child, I literally thought we're supposed to take fishing poles from the church out into the world and catch people and drag them back to church with us. I vividly remember having this picture in my head of hooking someone by by the mouth, and then I would reel them into the church building. I even thought that maybe at one point in time, I would be a good enough Christian that I could be catching people like you do when you're fly fishing. You know, you cast out, bring one in. Cast out, got another soul. Cast out, oh look, a Sunday school teacher. This is how my brain processed this story. That was the lesson that I took away from the felt boards and the sermons and even that song that I bet half of you are still singing in your head right now. In my Ozarkian upbringing, fishing was going out to the back pond on our four-wheeler with our lawn chairs, our tackle box, a cooler, and a fishing pole. Throwing our lines out and waiting and waiting and waiting for something to happen. Or taking a boat out to Stockton Lake, which is the smaller lake out of the Ozarks, and basically doing the same thing, waiting. This was my experience. This was my background. This was my culture. So of course, when I heard fishers of people, this is what I envisioned. Now, I don't think that's exactly what Jesus had in mind when he first called his disciples, or at least I hope not. And I don't think that's how the disciples took this call. First off, I don't think they owned lawn chairs or tackle boxes. But just in general, this was not their experience. This was not their culture. So during my time in Israel earlier this year, I had the honor of taking a short trip onto the Sea of Galilee in what is called the Jesus boat. Now, if you're unfamiliar with this, it's based on a boat that they found off of the Sea of Galilee in, I think, 86. It's historically significant because it's what we believe the Jews actually fished on during this time, which would have been what Jesus was on during this time. So all that to say, it's nothing like my dad's bass boat. This boat was huge. It had to withstand the winds of the Sea of Galilee, which is extremely windy. That day on that boat, we had a group of over 20, and there was a crew of at least 5. And there was still plenty of room to double or triple that number on the boat. So it makes sense when we hear that the disciples had partners, that Simon had partners. It would take a community to be able to work one, let alone 2 of these boats, to make sure to do what they needed to do to provide for their families. And unlike the fishermen in Walnut Grove, these men did not fish with fishing poles and lures. They used nets. So they got more than one at a time. They got whole netfuls. So in this story, we hear that Jesus told them to throw their nets overboard. And their catch was so huge that their nets were splitting. And now listen to this part. This is my favorite part of the story. They signaled for their partners in the other boat to come and help. They filled both boats full, so full they were about to sink. So when these men hear fishers of people, not only do they not envision dragging somebody into church, they see the work that goes into the reward. They know that it means working together in community. It means that they will be bringing people in by the netful, but only if they work together. The life of a fisherman is not exactly easy, and we hear earlier in the day that they had caught nothing all day, which means they got paid nothing, which means they didn't know how they were feeding their families. And they bore that together too. And now, with the abundance through the miracle of Jesus, they didn't keep that from one another. Simon, who owned the boats, didn't decide all of the profit was now his, but he also shared in the new burden of the abundance. So in probably the most obvious statement that I think I've ever made in my ministry, Jesus knew what he was doing. Jesus spoke to these men in a way that resonated with them. He understood exactly where these men were coming from. He took into account the culture and the socioeconomic position that these men were. He cared enough that he met them where they were. He showed them that he understood their struggle to provide for their family. He took time to care for them by providing them with an abundance of fish. Jesus didn't approach them saying, your hermeneutical understanding of ontological argument as it pertains to the subject of humanity's apprehension of good and evil correlates with mine, therefore you will become acquirers of like-minded Homo sapiens. I'm not sure what I said. I just threw big words together that I heard in seminary. And he didn't build a building in the distance and expect the masses to just show up. He was there. He cared enough to be in the masses. He cared enough to approach the crowd. He cared enough to provide food and income and security for these men in a time of despair. Jesus cared enough to take his message of love and a desire for a community to approach these men in a way that touched them and that spoke to them. And I think the response was pretty clear. They followed Jesus. They followed him out of their comfort zone. They left what they knew. They left the comfort for the uncomfortable, the known for the unknown. They took a chance and tried something new. I think that this text provides two wonderful examples for us. We have the example that Jesus provided, who cared enough about these men to approach them where they were in life with love and understanding. And then we have the disciples, the response of faith and adventure into an unknown world of a new ministry. So when I look back on my own childlike understanding of this text, you may think that my church missed out on an opportunity to explain this text in a way that I would understand. But when I think about my church and how they taught me this text, I remember Vacation Bible School and using toy fishing poles to go fishing for candy after we'd memorized a verse. I remember our youth group trips to someone's back field where we'd go spelunking and camping and fishing. But most of all, I associate this memory, or this story, with the memory of our yearly fish fries. I heard some laughing. Some people know what fish fries are, I hope. A few? All right, good. Every summer, we would have our yearly fish fries, and inevitably, one of those would be Fishers of Men themed. The entire members of our church would go out fishing for catfish, and they would bring them back, and we would have a group of people who would clean the catfish. We'd have a group of people who are preparing sides. We'd have a group of people frying the catfish, the french fries, and the hush puppies. And then, of course, we had a whole committee dedicated to making our sweet tea. Now, our community is a small, rural one. And as we put it, we didn't have 2 dimes to run between us. In other words, we didn't have much money. But we did share what we have. We would often have people come to these potlucks that didn't actually attend our church, but they needed a meal, and no one cared. We would happily share in our abundance with those who needed it. We would hold each other up when times were tough, and we would share in our abundance. That church, Walnut Grove First Christian Church, took Jesus' example and spoke to me in a language that I understood. They reached out in love, created a community, and because of the support of that community, I was able to reach out in faith. I was able to move from a town of 650 people to Chicago, and then from Chicago all the way across the country to California. Potlucks and fish fries is what Walnut Grove First Christian Church did well. That is how they embodied the example that Jesus set forth. That is how they spoke to the community in which they were doing their ministry. Now, judging by the lack of men in overalls sitting in here right now, I would say that catfishing maybe isn't exactly Manhattan Beach Community Church's go-to ministry. But in the short time that I've been here, I can tell you that the church community has so much to offer. We have an amazing theater ministry, music ministry, youth ministry, children's ministry, outreach ministry, and I'm not going to name them all because I'm learning each week about a new one. Individually and corporately, we have many talents. As we continue to thrive in these ministries, the call that we hear from Jesus in this passage is how do we invite others into our community of fishermen? How do we speak the language of our surrounding community so that they also feel welcomed into our ministries? How do we show Manhattan Beach that we care about their needs? To take care of our neighbors and approach the masses where they are now and not expect them to show up at our door. When I was writing this sermon, Patrick, my husband, asked me, "What is Manhattan Beach's Ozarkian fishing? What is the equivalent in that community?" And my response was, I have no idea. I am learning about this community, and I am learning about this church family, and I am so excited to find out. It is my hope that we continue to learn from each other, and we will continue to challenge each other to build ministries based on our strengths and our desire to continue to make fishers of people in our community. It is my hope that we will embrace the example of Jesus and reach out to our community, and we will embrace the faith of the disciples and step outside of the boat to become fishers of people.